Mic check, 1, 2. 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 Good morning. This is Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. The press conference with Speaker Harshman and President Perkins will begin momentarily. Please stay with us. Again, this is Craig Blumenshine with Wyoming PBS. We're waiting for Senate President Drew Perkins to join our call. We'll be with you momentarily. Mics are live.
Okay. Well, thanks, Greg. And President, I appreciate you kind of helping us get organized and really all the media. And I think what the President and I were, just wanted to kind of have this opportunity to kind of debrief and talk about what happened and what the next steps are. But I think as much as anything, appreciate the coverage. There were several members of the media that came to the Capitol. It's probably a little bit different than the Capitol coverage in the past. It was more like, probably, as the President said, covering action in the library. It's pretty quiet and those kind of things. But, as a citizen legislature, I think the public access thing is so important. And we had thousands of people watch, but we wanted to make sure and follow up really any questions that members of the media would have, and then, or any questions they're hearing out there, those kind of things. And so really that's the idea, and then just to kind of have this conversation, what's coming next. So anyway, appreciate the opportunity. Thanks. And I think I'll just throw it over to the President if you have some comments, President.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Craig, thank you for having us today. Apologize for our late start, but one thing about the citizen legislature is there's a lot of things that are going on in our lives, in the work we do. We still have to take care of people, but while we're trying to take care of the state. But in addition to that, some of the just wanted to come back and reiterate with the speaker a couple things about this session. One, it went amazingly well. For having never done this before, we did a lot of practice. We've been doing a lot of smaller meetings, but we certainly have never had a legislative session via virtual attendance before. We had, it went amazingly well. I want to just express a lot of appreciation to our staff at the LSO and others in the governor's office who, through their cooperation, were able to do that. It was pretty amazing, and many people saw between the debate, between the various motions on rules and things like that, to the conference committees, which were also zoomed and televised on YouTube. Many people had an opportunity to view the workings of the legislature that before this just haven't had those types of opportunities to be there. We've had, at different points in times, there were over 1,000 house and hundreds of spades, but watching the conference committees do their work on YouTube. So the transparency is, I think, just unparalleled in what was done. I think there's some work to do on permitting and encouraging and taking public participation in the work that we do when we do it virtually. We're working on those things. It's very, very important. But certainly, I've never seen, I don't think anything could have been really much more transparent than what you saw this weekend. The Management Council put together 4 bills. Those 4 bills were introduced and explained and then debated for hours. We started at 8 o'clock on Friday morning. The Senate adjourned about 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, and then reconvened at a little after 9 on Saturday morning to finish the work of the day. House was very similar to that. So I just want to thank and recognize also the staff that participated in that, and also the legislators who participated over Zoom from 8 in the morning to 8 in the morning to 1. But basically it's a lot of hours straight, about 17, 18 hours in a row on Zoom, and it just shows the dedication that these part-time legislators have as they take time away from their lives, to their families, their businesses, to participate and try and do the best job they can for the people of Wyoming. So thank you, Craig.
So I think President and I just would open it up to any questions, I think, out there. If folks have any questions.
Yes, Sean Boyd from Wyoming News Now. Gentlemen, thank you for having me on. My first question is, with the four bills that were debated, and obviously there was conclusion to that, if you could just minorly expand on what some of those conclusions were, and then ahead of the next meeting that you guys, next special session that you guys will have, what are you guys prioritizing in those bills?
Yeah, I think President, you want to take maybe the first two, and then I'll talk about bills 3 and 4.
Okay, sure. The first bill was basically a bill that appropriated money from the CARES Act to the governor's office. Started out, I don't remember the exact number we ended up with. I think that it started out at 400. I think with all the way it was done, and the governor sent out some veto messages to change that a little bit, but there was about $400 million that was over $400 million was appropriated in that first bill. And then it started to talk about all the different things the governor could use that for. Gave the governor a lot of flexibility about different programs that he could move that into, that are existing programs, and other ways that he could use that money under the CARES Act, move that around. It also provided that if there's not further legislative action, that the balance of the CARES Act, which originally was left about $400 million, if there wasn't further legislative action by July 15th, that would be released to the governor for him to use in whatever he's doing under the bills that have been authorized. And then there's a second installment, the balance, which originally was about $325 million, would then be released, I think, of August 15th. And so that's what the first bill did. The second bill then went in, and we made some temporary legislative changes to various programs to then allow the governor and the executive branch to expand those programs temporarily to provide additional relief to both businesses and workers and individuals, and with different types of programs. For example, we made, if you've been diagnosed with COVID-19, we made it a work-related injury, or more likely you were to catch it at work. It's still a rebuttable presumption, but actually make it so they could be covered at work as a workers' compensation injury. Also provide that also provided immunity to employers for workers who, while they're working, if they're in a covered if they're covered by workers' compensation, then the employers would also have immunity in that regard. It expanded. Provided for the governor to expand the unemployment compensation, provided for premium holidays and relief. So for employers to mostly through premium credits against future payments for workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, to have those to offset future expenses, which will provide them some relief, as well as some other things. All of those things needed some legislative tweaks so the governor could do those. The governor can't change the law through statute, but the legislature made a number of temporary changes to those laws, and then gave the governor some broad authority to deal with those for the at least to the end of the year. So I think that's pretty much covers 1 and 2.
Right. So then
Sir,
the third bill.
May I ask that you start by saying and spelling your first and last name before you can speak? The gentleman that just spoke, I apologize, sir. I should have had you do that before you spoke.
Sure. My name is, I'm Senator Drew Perkins, and I am the president of the Senate.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Steve Harshman, Speaker of the House. That's Steveharshman. And so the next bill that passed was was House Bill 1004, and that was really Wyoming's approach to fill in the gaps of, that you've heard a lot about the federal Paycheck Protection Program, and that's actually infused over $1 billion into our state, and that's coming right from the federal government through local banks in Wyoming. And I think the average forgivable loan now of that program is over $80,000 for our Wyoming businesses. But there's a few businesses, there's some that have not been eligible, particularly smaller businesses. 93%, 94% of the employers in our state employ 50 or less people. So we created a bill. Minerals Committee worked it in a couple meetings before, lots of public input, and really a couple different programs within the bill in this House Bill 1004. The 50 or less employees is really focused on those businesses that were closed by health orders, required closures. And so the executive branch now is writing rules. They'll be administered through the Wyoming Business Council, and those will be capped at about 50,000. We moved it, and there's a tranche for those under 25 employees up to 20,000, 50 employees up to 50,000, and then one with 100 employees, stipends as high as 300,000 for expenses related to business interruption and some of the COVID expenses. And again, I think they're probably writing rules as we speak. I think the Business Council has been very, very responsive, and so we're hoping that will roll out by June 1st. And that's where most of the money, frankly, the President talked about, I think it's $465 million was the total appropriated in these three bills. 75% of it's going to go to the private sector. And so that's really important. And so our initial focuses were really to get this, to aid in this response that the governor's done a wonderful job responding to the initial crisis. And then some of the recovery pieces, and then also the, this economic development piece. So, it's going to keep evolving as we move forward, but those were the three that passed. 75% of the money, again, to the private sector, but a large chunk as well will go to our cities, towns, and counties for those expenses, hospitals, healthcare providers, those kind of things. And so, and then as the President said, we've set up some more tranches or trigger points that if the legislature decides not to come back into session again, we'll free up those monies on July 15th and I think September 15th. And so that's that. There was one bill that failed, House Bill Senate File 1003. Really, probably not as. It was an idea the President and I had about really encouraging agency heads in state government, local governments, school districts to be able to save money, because the fiscal year is going to end at the end of June here now. And we wanted to really try to provide an incentive for those agencies and school districts to save a little bit so we can help on the eventual downturn in budgets. And so that bill kind of got flipped a little bit. That happens. It's probably not the most important bill, so it wasn't, that bill died, and we'll move on and look for other tools. So not a big deal. But I think the big work was done, and done appropriately, and I think really done well. So thanks for the question. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Andrew with Wildfile. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, hear you good.
Great.
Andrew, loud and clear.
Great, thank you guys. I just wanted to, if you have had a chance to review the governor's veto particularly the one on 1004 that gave him more, took away the appropriation in there and gave him more flexibility, I think, to distribute the 450 million than the bills did. Do you guys have any comment on that, how that changed?
And our president, that's all right. I think his veto was fine. I think it probably, I think particularly that 20,000 minimum, that probably needed to be reworked a little bit, clarified, give him a little flexibility. I think that was fine. I think, part of this deal too, you have different branches for a reason. And, this governor, he's the process guy. He's the transparency guy. And I think he really welcomed our help in this. And you've seen it all across the country. There's been a little bit of, and rightfully so, a little bit of tension between the appropriations branch of government in these states and the executive branch, which carries out the laws and the appropriations that the people's houses pass. So I don't think the veto did any harm. Actually, I think it probably, that 20,000 floor was probably a good thing. I think probably should have happened. I think his veto message, I'd be careful not to read too much into anything. But the governor's been exceptional to work with. I think the cooperation between the president, myself, the governor, and really all the legislative branch. The governor sits down once a week with us for over an hour, answers questions from every member, all 90 of us. And some of them are a little more pointed than others, and it's been a good back and forth. And so we appreciate his work. And, you look at some of these states, they're literally suing each other over these issues. And state of Colorado, the governor just appropriated $1.6 billion on his own. I was in a speakers conference earlier this week, and 38 speakers around the United States. And I think Wyoming, we're way out in front. And with cooperation about getting relief to our people, and do it in a really transparent way that honors and follows the process and the Constitution. And so I think it wasn't perfect, but it's not a perfect process. So I think so I think it was all good in the end. I think it's fine, and some members might whatever, but I think all in all, it's not perfect, but it was really good. So.
If I can, this is Drew Perkins, and I'll just jump in, and I think I'll just echo for the most part the speaker's comments. I saw the governor's veto message yesterday, and if I was in his shoes, I might very well have done those two things as well. I think that he looked at how to do those and do those more effectively through the process, and made a couple of nips. And also, I think, freed up a little bit additional money that can be used in that. At the end of the day, I think that we're looking at, as the speaker indicated, the majority of this, we're trying to get out to just the businesses, the private sector, private individuals, and provide much needed relief. I got the first haircut that I've had in 4 months on Monday this week, and talked to my barber, who was closed by executive order, the governor's office, and then through the local county levels. And there's a number of those that were closed. Those individuals didn't really have a lot of. I told him about this. He was actually unaware of it. And so you go across our state, there are people who have certainly been harmed by this. I think the governor's improvements, actually, I think his vetoes may actually, I don't know that they improve the bills, but they'll certainly improve his ability and the flexibility he has to administer it in a practical manner. And so in that regard, I don't have a particular problem with the couple of line item vetoes that the governor exercised.
Hi, y'all. This is Tom with the Tribune Eagle. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, y'all, for taking the time to do this. Well, I was wondering, too, kind of looking ahead as well for all the work y'all have coming. So I know that one of the bills y'all passed with the business relief programs, that was kind of, working hand in hand with the governor's office to get some of this CARES money out. And I'm wondering, are y'all envisioning pretty much any big program the governor does with the CARES Act to have corresponding legislation in the coming weeks? Or kind of, I guess, how do you see that collaboration continuing to work moving forward?
Yeah, go. Yeah, President, if you want to go, I heard a beep out there. I couldn't quite hear all right when you asked. I think it was about a program.
Yeah, basically just, are y'all going to be working, anytime the governor has a large program he's setting up with the CARES Act, will y'all try to set up corresponding legislation for the special session that's coming up next month?
Yeah, I think, all these ideas, the governor, as the president said, the governor can't create programs. And, we might have that debate whether he can be 11 federal dollars when we're not in session and how much of that and those kind of things. But it's one thing to be $10 million highway funds. It's an entirely different thing when you have $1.25 billion, basically nearly a year's worth of general fund expenditures. It's going to require more than 5 people in the governor's office to figure that out. And I think, this process works. You get a lot of people involved, hundreds of emails, comments by citizens of Wyoming to 90 legislators. And in the end, the process will work. And so we're certainly open, the president and I and the legislature, we're going to continue to work, cooperatively and collaborate with the governor to set up any of those type of programs. We've done some real temporary things. I think the work share program, you'll see more expansion of that. And so I think all across the line, and we've given all these committees different topics, and I think you'll see them here next week and the coming weeks really start to dig into those. And as we learn more too, I think it'll continue to change. A week ago, it was pretty pessimistic coming out of the Congress that there'd be any further legislation. I think in the last day or two, I think the tone has changed a little bit, and I think there'll be more legislation, I believe, and more guidance, and we'll continue to adapt to that.
This is Drew Perkins, and I would just add in that I think, for example, I was listening for a little bit to the Transportation Committee, which was meeting yesterday on Zoom, and you've got the executive branch are in making testimony and answering questions about what they're doing and the things that they want to see moving forward. And so some of that has to do with, it's not all COVID all the time. These committees have a lot of work to do besides the COVID topics that they've been assigned. But their agencies come to them. Every agency in the state reports to one of the 10 standing committees. And they come with not only COVID problems, but other problems that they have. Some of the problems will be exacerbated because of COVID. And so they're working not only on programs just to deal with COVID and the current crisis, but also trying to look a little bit midterm and long-term the health and what happens in the state, because one of these days we are going to be reopened all the way. One of these days, we're going to be focusing on things other than this pandemic. And so it's our job to continue to do that. The governor's office continues to have that. They've been having their hands full and dealing with this, but as it's reopening, now we're kind of going to this next phase. How do we reopen, and how do we do that safely? What does this look like as the steps go forward? What contingency plans do we make? And so the governor and the executive branch will continue to work with us and the legislative branch with them as we move forward. And we'll look at, in some cases, we may come back and tweak some of the things we did in this session. The other things we're doing is looking at things for what are we doing the next public emergency? Should it be handled, and should it be the way that it was this time? And look at those types of things. We may, and then also look at, again, this whole range of things that happen as we reopen. How do we do that? How do we do that effectively and smartly? What statutory changes do we need in order to recognize where we're at now and what needs to happen over the next several months and maybe even the next year or so as we deal with these things? And so we've got committees. We signed probably 40, 50 topics to the 10 standing committees and some other committees a little over about 2 weeks ago today. and there's a lot of work to be done. And so we'll see what they come out. It's up to those chairmen of those committees and the members of those committees in consultation with the public, as they take public comment, and consultation with the executive branch as they take testimony and input from the legislative branch to both, one, figure out what are those solutions, and then two, bring them forward.
I could ask a follow-up to that. Speaker, you were talking about the potential for future federal aids, and I talked to the Senate President anyway this week about the budget cuts the state might have to make and how dire they really are. And so I was wondering if you guys are you communicating with Wyoming's DC delegation, and are you asking them to push for federal aid that is more flexible and could replace lost revenue?
Yeah, the answer, Andrew, the answer is yes. We've been in those communications, and I think Wyoming is probably, we know how dependent we are on mineral extraction. We're talking COVID today, but the thing that people have kind of lost track of was the Saudi-Russian price war that hit the exact same week. Saudi Arabia floods the world with oil, discounts the price. Wyoming oil was trading, for the first time negative. June 1st, it sounds like we're not going to have a drilling rig working in the state. It'll be the first time in the state's history. We've been drilling for oil in the state before we were a state. We were still a territory. So, so part of this thing, it's not only, not that we were totally closed down, but everybody else has to open up. We need factories going. We need electricity consumption to go up. We need people driving and flying again. So our exports can go to market and do those things and keep our people working and pay those taxes and do all those things and keep our economy rolling. So, any of those kind of helps. So going to Wyoming, half of our land is owned by the federal government. Almost 2/3 of our mineral estate, our minerals are owned by the federal government. And so when, I'm watching closely ideas to reduce federal mineral royalties and from the 12%, which we get basically half, to 0.5%, which is allowed in federal statute. Those kind of things would be, we're already looking at probably a 40% drop, 30 to 40% drop in revenues to our general fund. To put that in perspective, I mean, if it is the worst case scenario, if it is 600 million, you literally have to lay off every state employee. People say, oh, we got too many employees, cut state employees. I don't think we're going to lay off every state employee in the state. And so there's some, we'll take any of the relief we can get, just like businesses are. And, but I think we'll just have to watch and see how that turns out here in the next few weeks. But I think every state is in that same kind of, we're having this open up. We need Chicago to go. We need air conditioning in Chicago, electricity use, all those things to get our state kind of rolling again as well.
I think those are great comments and great ideas. Andrew, you and I talked earlier. Is there anything else you want to follow up with in that regard?
No, I think that there seems to be there is a new package on the table that passed the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm not sure where it's at in the Senate, and there's definitely kind of a partisan divide over it. And so I'm just wondering if, as a Republican state, but one that is going to really feel these budget cuts, is it your message to Congress that you want to see some more federal aid that you can use more directly to shore up the revenues you lost because of the pandemic?
I think the speaker signed a letter similar, and I've signed a letter that went out from not I wouldn't even say a majority, but a significant number of state presidents of the Senate and of the various states. I think the speaker did a similar thing with various speakers, and a couple things. One, we weren't specifically asking for additional revenue, but we were asking potentially for some more flexibility with the CARES Act to allow and recognize some of that. But at this point, as you sit there and look at what we're facing, it's unknown how long the reopening will occur and what that will look like. I think a lot of us have recognized that there's a lot of things that have probably changed, maybe forever. I think that with all the teleconferencing that's been done, for example, I think that we may not see airlines come back the way that they were. It is nice to see people line up at the borders, at the entrances to Yellowstone Park and want to get in. I think that's important. Of course, under the Senate from Connecticut, their volatile source of revenue was their income tax. They have lots of hedge fund people from New York that live in those communities, and when those investment funds and hedge funds are not doing well, they have a significant downswing in their economy. You add in sales taxes and those types of things, and it's not just energy states that are going to be hit. The entire country is going to be hit by this downturn. And states like Wyoming, and many states have balanced budget requirements, and states, even the larger states, have significant restrictions, most of them, on their ability to borrow. And so it's a challenge for all of us moving forward. We'll accept the relief that we get, and we'll also make plans to deal with what we have.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Tom has texted me. He said his computer crashed, and he asked me to ask a question for him, if y'all don't mind.
Sure.
He said, I know Speaker Harshman wanted a narrow scope for last weekend's session, but what is it he envisions for the one that could happen at the end of June? Will individuals be allowed? Individual bills, excuse me.
Yeah, good question. I think, we're having a lot of talks about that now, the president and I and management council and committee chairman. And generally in special sessions, individual bills don't make it because they just have not, you just don't have the time, and the process to be vetted in the public is so important. And so, and if we do a 5-day session, you're still going to probably have to do 2 readings in one day. We did 3 readings in one day for this 2-day session, but days to do that. You're just not, the enemy of all this is time. When we have we had a 24-day budget session, we had 500 bills filed. You just can't do them all. And if we say, hey, we'd like around 20 committee bills, 2 from each committee, start 10 on each side, roughly. And if there's another 40 filed or 50, you just can't hear them. It's just not enough hours in a day. And so many of those would be screened. The first ones are screened by really what the president and I introduce and refer to committees. So if they even get introduced. And so historically in Wyoming, no individual bills make it in special sessions. Just very rare.
I really don't have anything to add. We spoke about this as late as yesterday. I think we're putting together some advisory letter to our committee chairman to go out to them. But I think our last special session, the last special session prior to this year, it was in 2004, and if I remember right, it was a 5-day special session, and they dealt with 10 bills. And it's just, you're going to go through this process, as everybody saw this last weekend, even those 4 bills. I mean, to get through those 3 readings, started at 8 in the morning and went until 1 o'clock in the morning to do those. And so it's just, in this case, I think that the way the rules will be for the special session is that the committees of the whole, at least under the current rules, unless they're changed by a vote of 2/3 of each house, the committee of the whole will accept amendments. And so committee of the whole will not just be an explanation, but it'll be a debate as well as the ability to provide amendments. So the process will take even a little bit longer. So it took us that many hours to do 4 bills in 3 readings in one day. Now if you think about trying to do 10, that's still a significant challenge, but one that people have to be aware of. We certainly do 10 bills in a committee of the whole during the session, but you've got to just do it accelerated, because you still have to have at least that. You used to have one of those 5 days has to be a day for conference committees to resolve those differences, and my guess is that will be a long day as well. So there'll be extra long days. There won't be a lot of committee meetings. There'll be a lot of time where we're convened as bodies to do the work that's before us. But just and for the reasons the speaker said, you just can't, you're just limited by the time and the process and how much you can do. As well as, again, at least the ones that come through committee will have been vetted and heard at least twice, be my guess, in committee hearings and with time for input. The individual bills have come. There's not time for that, and you have to be very careful, because any time you take away from the work of the body as a whole, if you're going to actually have committee meetings during those 5 days, that takes away from the time that you can actually work the other bills in the bodies. And so it just becomes a logistics and practicality as opposed to any policy behind it. It's what you can get done in that period of time.
Thanks. And do you guys have a date for this next session? Is that finalized? And also, will the governor issue another proclamation, or at this point, can you just bring yourselves back? I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think we do not have a firm date. I mean, we're looking at that week of the 25th. We could back up and start on that Saturday before that. I guess that'd be the 23rd. You're bumping up against July 4th. If you go after July 4th, you're bumping it. Weighing all this, what's happening with the federal government? Should we wait, see how this 4th bill in Congress, if it moves forward? So we're watching all that, continuing the committee work. As far as the governor calling us back in, he has called us in. We believe we have 20 days now in this special session. If that becomes a problem, we can call ourselves back in with a majority vote of both houses. So that's not really a sticking point, but I think he will. We get to that point where we all kind of agreed on our focus on this, really on continuing this recovery and relief and this economic development. And if it does change, the 4th really is this revenue replacement. We've done a lot of revenue replacement for the private sector, and we're hopeful we can do some of that with this 4th bill for the public sector, so we'd be involved in that. But I think as far as cutting budgets and budget hearings and doing all that, that's for later. That's not for June, July, or August. That's a later process, and maybe not even a process for this legislature, for the 65th. That might be a mission for the 66th, but I think we'll learn more, every week as we move forward.
I don't have anything other than to add that, Andrew, I think we were just talking about that this week, that if you're going to make smart decisions, you've got to have enough data, and you have to have a data that shows some transit from which you can extrapolate the future. And we're not going to have that data. We're not going to even have, we're not even going to have 2 or 3 months. We're not even going to have 2 months of data of what the effect of the shutdown's been until you get to the end of June. And so, it's whatever we do with that, we want to make smart decisions, not just ones that are, at least we want to do a little back of the envelope math with some real data as opposed to just guessing, because whatever we guess will invariably change. And I think that's the one thing that we've all seen in this is that as this goes forward, the only sure thing we have is today's going to be a little bit different than yesterday.
So you think the first year, this first fiscal year, the budget could proceed as it was passed in March?
Oh, no. If that's your impression, the answer to that is no. I think that, and Andrew, we talked about this earlier in the week, that that the governor already has a task force working on this. He's included in the conversations the budget and fiscal people from the LSO, but he's got his budget director working these problems and making these determinations and finding out what they want to do. They're recognizing that they've got to make those adjustments. And so if the governor in my conversations recognizes that he can't wait until the session. He can't, if you don't make your moves before the end of the first fiscal year, then all of your changes have to be effective in the second year of the biennium. And that just makes it an impossible task. So I expect that you'll see the governor move aggressively to rein this in and start to direct it where he wants to go, and that it'll be a collaborative effort between us and the governor's office and the executive branch about what changes need to be made to the budget that we passed, because it's very apparent that the budget we passed was based on projections that will not happen.
Gotcha.
Well, very good. I guess if there's no other questions, or probably I'll sign off. But we appreciate your joining us, and we just wanted to follow up because I know we got emails from you and we responded, and we're like everybody is running pretty fast. So we just wanted to take a little time and make sure people will be able to ask their questions. So.
And I again, thank you all for attending. I hope that we answered your questions, ones that you have. If you've got others, please feel free to follow up with emails or phone calls. You've never been shy in the past. I don't expect you to be shy in the future. And I'll just again apologize for my lateness. I actually had an appointment with a client who had some problems, and it just went longer than I thought it was going to go. And then when I was trying to get on, all of a sudden I had to have meeting IDs and passwords, and the speaker was sending those to me, and Craig was sending me to. So I apologize for being late. It just was unavoidable, but it wasn't because I was dilly-dallying around. I was actually trying to do my real job, which I still have a mortgage and some other bills I got to pay once in a while. So I do have to work sometimes. But thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think, just to close, I think we've, this deal's far from over, and I think we just got to continue to, support each other, support our communities and neighbors, and get back on our feet. And this is probably the best state of any to ride something like this out, but how we respond to this thing is going to be really important. So, we'll work through this, and we just got to keep supporting each other in our communities and keep after it. So it's all we can do, and then kind of determine our own outcome, our own future on this deal. So that's the work, and it'll continue. So, okay, thank you all.